All right, so you guys, we're going to get started on exercise 228. Welcome to the last 2 weeks of school. Stress levels are probably increasing at this point. The goal is obviously to still give you lots and lots of information, but to have most of it be able to be done in class. But we'll kind of see how it goes. What I want to do over the next 3 classes, so today, Wednesday, and next Monday, is I want to concentrate on getting good quality drawings out of your Rhino file. And this is something that having gotten feedback from people who have taken the class before, people that have moved on to Berkeley and whatever, they've all talked about, obviously, being able to model in Rhino and then coupling it with some good quality V-Ray renderings is really, really useful and certainly powerful. But a lot of times, if you don't understand how to get good quality line drawings out of your Rhino file, you end up getting these great renderings and then very mediocre, at best, plans, sections, elevations. And when we're working in the world of architectural representation, we have to have good quality plan sections and elevations. That's the fundamental. I mean, you can have the best 3D model in the world, and if you have terrible plans and sections, you go into a review, they're going to blast you for it. And so I want to spend 3 whole class days really talking through the strategies of how do you take a nice, advanced, good quality 3D model. I mean, if you're doing a model that's good enough to get great renderings out, you ought to be able to use that model to create good plan sections and elevations. And so there is some strategy for how you go about doing this and creating this. It will be helpful for those of you that have already taken 135, probably those of you that have already taken 135 with me specifically. But we will end up using a fair amount of Illustrator as part of this. I recognize that Illustrator is not technically part of this class. Neither is Photoshop. But the post-processing, I believe we can shoehorn into a small enough set of steps that even if you've never opened Illustrator before, you'll still technically be able to do it if I walk you through it that way. And so I apologize for having to do it that way, but at the same time, we have to do some post-processing because just coming out of Rhino isn't quite good enough. And so we'll kind of work through that, and I'll show you the variety of outputs and then how to do it. For today, we have a complete write-up, step-by-step, that goes through absolutely everything that I'm going to do. It's Assembly 10.8 Elevations from Rhino. And I think it's important that you guys reference this because there's no way that you can internalize every single step that I go through. But I spent a lot of time trying to put this together so that you can actually use it. And obviously you can see there's lots and lots of screenshots, etc., for you to see exactly what I'm doing, especially if you've never opened or touched Illustrator before. Once you get to the Illustrator section, which is right about here, step 11, everything from 11 on is, I want it to be very obvious. This is where you change this. This is where you change that. So I would really reference it. And obviously, you can go back and watch the video as well. If you feel comfortable in Illustrator, obviously, you can be a little bit looser when you're doing this sort of exporting. So anyway, let's continue on. I have the same Rhino file open that I want to work with. And I have a choice, obviously, of which building elevation I want to use. I can use this elevation, which is, in my particular building, is the more attractive one. I could do this elevation. That wouldn't be a bad one to pick. Obviously, the elevations, looking through the dirt that way are not really the best choice. If we were doing a true board for this particular project, we'd have to do all 4 elevations. And generally speaking, the strategy for when you're going to create an elevation of a part of your building, say I wanted to do this elevation there, I'd take and split off the part of the terrain that's hiding my building right next to the building, and then hide that particular piece before we did what we're going to end up doing today. But in the interest of what we're doing, I'm going to concentrate just on this elevation. And before I get too far into it, what I need to do is I need to establish the elevation view in its very basic form in one of my viewports. And it turns out that my front viewport happens to be the viewport that I'm after. And one of the things that's important by switching to the front view, and again, I have nothing selected. If I go to Properties and I look at my camera settings, right, you can see that the 50 millimeter is grayed out. I can't actually change it. And that is because the projection is parallel. And so I need to make sure that that is the case, even if you select a custom view. If you wanted an elevation that wasn't one of the standard views, you could set up that elevation using your camera. But you have to make sure that it's in parallel projection, because this is an elevation, not a section, or excuse me, not a perspective. And so it is parallel. I can't change the lens view. I want to make sure that I can see the whole piece of my building, the whole elevation. And how much of it, or how much of the surrounding terrain that's shown, is really up to you, and kind of establishing this view. Once I have it set up like this, I am going to save the view as a named view. And so I'll go to Set View, Named Views. I'm going to save this as Front Elevation. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Now I have a view for front elevation, and I can come back to that view. And this is something that's important, because we're going to need to come back to this view several times, and we may lose it in the process because there are several steps that are involved in setting this up. So once I have the front elevation view shown like this, I'm going to go to the little triangle next to my front elevation, and I'm going to go to Set Camera, Show Camera, so that I can actually see the camera. Remember, the camera doesn't show up in this view, but it does show up in the other views. So I'm going to switch back into the perspective view, and we can see that the camera is there. And the reason that it's such a long camera is because it's in parallel projection. And that's how Rhino demonstrates that it's a parallel projection camera. If it was one of the cameras that we've been used to seeing, it's usually kind of a short little triangle here. The wider obviously corresponds to like an 18mm lens. So there it is as my overall view. And what I need to do is I need to draw a little rectangle that represents what this view is. And this has to do with the exporting process down the road, because I want to know exactly what this particular view is. And so if we go, just to reference the slides or the tutorial here, essentially what I'm doing is right here under Rhino 5.37 viewport rectangle. That's what I'm doing. So if you want, you can follow along with that, but obviously I'm just going to do it. And so I already have my viewport shown. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and hide the terrain for just a second. We'll go ahead and turn that off so that I can see a little bit better what's going on here. And I'm actually going to hide the building for a second. And I'll just type hide so that I can really see these points that are on my camera here. And so what I'll do is I'm going to go to a rectangle, but I'm going to pick the rectangle with 3 points because it'll be a little bit easier to create. And I'm going to go from this point to this point and then down to that point. All right? And so I end up with a rectangle that's not quite the right size. It's a quarter of the size. So I can type scale, go to this corner, and then press 2, which doubles it. And I now have a rectangle that matches up with the view that I'm seeing. And it may seem a little bit, why am I creating this? But this will make sense as we move forward in just a second. OK, so let me go back. I'm going to type show so that everything comes back on. I'm also going to turn back on my terrain. And I'm going to take a look at the front elevation view. And so let me go back to my set view, front elevation. And what's happened is when I showed everything, the giant disk that represents the water has come back into view. And that disk is blocking my front elevation view. So I'm going to go ahead and type hide and get back to where I have just my front elevation shown. So once again, we'll go back to my set view, go to front elevation, so I know I'm in this particular elevation. Now, as part of this export, I'd like to have some contour lines that help represent the terrain. And so before I actually do my Make 2D, which is what we're getting to, I'm going to create a set of Z contours that are just part of this export. And so this has nothing to do with creating a physical model, so it doesn't matter. The interval, remember we used to use that chart to pick what the interval was. Doesn't matter for what I'm doing here. I'll pick, say, maybe 2 feet, and I'll contour. So let me go back into my perspective view here. And let me create a new sublayer called contours. I'll make that active, and I'm going to contour this surface. Base point, we'll say, is right there. Direction perpendicular to the contour planes. This has to be the z-axis. So I'll zoom out one of these side views. Ortho will go straight up. And I'm going to make my distance between the contours 2 feet. And this is going to take a little while because there's a lot of them to draw. All right, so now we see all of those. Well, it's not quite done, sorry. It'll be done soon. Perfect. We can see all of those lines as part of this view, which is what I want. Okay? And that just provides a little bit of backdrop for the rendering. And you can actually see a little bit in the little sample image that I included there. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to take this three-dimensional view and make it into a flat drawing of lines. And Rhino has an absolutely fantastic command built into it that's called Make 2D. And what Make 2D does is it takes any view that you see and it creates a line drawing of that view. Right? That line drawing is then flat, and we can use that as part of our export. So I'm going to go ahead and type Make 2D. It's also under Curve from Objects, Make 2D, I think. Nope, apparently not. Well, we're going to type Make 2D instead. So Make 2D, first option here is Select Objects to Draw. Generally speaking, I type All to select everything. Okay. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and press Enter, and I'll get the Make 2D drawing options. And so what I want is the current view, so exactly what I see in this view. I want to show the hidden lines. And here's something that's important to denote. I have the ability to maintain source layers or not maintain source layers. So here's the deal. If you feel comfortable in Illustrator, check the box to maintain source layers. It's more flexible as an output, but you'll end up with lots and lots of Illustrator layers that you'll then have to deal with. If you don't feel comfortable in Illustrator, make sure that you uncheck this box, and you'll get 2 layers to deal with in Illustrator. Okay? And this has to do with line weights. So if I have all the source layers, I can go through and specify, oh, this is a wall layer, it's going to have a little bit thicker. This is a window, it's going to have a little bit thinner line. And so I can do more with that, but it's more work on the other end. Okay? So I only recommend checking this box if you feel comfortable in Illustrator. Okay? So for right now, I'm going to leave it unchecked. And I can show you an example where I do it checked a little bit later on if you want me to. So for right now, the layers for the Make 2D objects, we're going to create 2 layers. One is a Make 2D for visible lines, and one is a Make 2D for hidden lines. Okay? If I were to maintain source layers, right, we wouldn't get the visible lines and the hidden lines. We'd get all of these objects on their individual layers. Okay? So we're going to uncheck that. The other thing is I could turn on Show Tangent Edges if I wanted to, and you'll see that I get another set, visible tangents and hidden tangents. Generally speaking, I don't choose to show the tangent edges, but it is something that you could choose to do. Right? What that would give us is a line right here along the edge of the terrain. Okay? And so for the interest of it, why not? We'll include it in this export for now. Okay? So now that I'm done, I'll go ahead and say OK. And it will take Rhino a bit of time to process this. You can see it's saying creating 2D drawing. Yeah, it's creating a separate layer of that. So that's why there's not too much risk. No, we can't do anything about watching it. It's just going to appear after it's done. So there's not really anything to see. One of the important things about Make 2D is the Make 2D isn't going to show up in the front elevation view. It's going to show up in the top view at 0, 0. Because when you do a Make 2D, it's creating a new set of lines that look like this view that end up at that point. So as soon as it's done, we'll do it. Obviously, this is a complicated one. There's a lot to the building. So be patient with it. And when it's done, I'll show you what results. It was selected. It was just behind the little window. It's an artifact. Okay, so it did just finish its Make 2D, and like I said, the Make 2D doesn't show anything in the front elevation. So I have to double-click out of my front elevation view, and I'm going to look for it in the top view. And so we'll zoom out, and somewhere around 0.00, there it is, we end up with an elevation view. Right? So if I'm looking at this, see how it's an elevation view? It is very much a flat. Let me move it out of the way of the rest of my model. I'm just going to move it up here. And then let me show you in the perspective view so that you can kind of see it. So what it did is it created a flat drawing. There it is, flat, of the view that I was showing. Okay? And you can see things that are white here are the hidden lines that it created. So everything that it looked through and saw, there's my stairs, etc., that was all shown as part of it because I included it. We also have the tangent lines that were shown. But we have way more terrain and everything that we really needed. And part of the reason that I drew that rectangle of my site, which is right here, is so that I knew what the boundaries of my view were. So I'm going to use these lines. So we'll go ahead and select those. Select this. As a trim. So I'll type trim, and I'm going to get rid of the extra stuff. Right? So we'll come through here, get rid of anything extra. Okay? Then I'll go ahead and delete all this extra stuff. Oops. Get rid of all this. Because this is far beyond the scope of what I'm going to show or need. So we'll clean that up, and now I end up with just this, which represents the ultimate drawing that I'm going to use. Okay? And again, it's flat. Okay? So I'll take this, and I'm going to move this from this point to 0, 0, 0, so that it's at the origin. I'll zoom selected so that I can see it. Now, obviously, it's floating out there in space because of the rest of my model and whatever. It doesn't matter. I just need this to be at 0, 0 for when I do the export. Okay? The one other thing that I'm going to do before I get too far along is I'm going to change some of the colors of these layers. Okay? So if we come over and we look at this Make 2D layers, I have visible lines and then hidden lines and tangents. Okay? I want all of these to be different colors. So I'm going to come in here and just assign the basic colors. So we'll go red, right? Let's do, I avoid oranges and yellows generally in Rhino, but orange will end up fine for right now. Again, these are all about exports anyway. Let's do green. Let's do cyan. Let's do blue. And let's do purple here. Okay, so I just changed those to be a rainbow of colors because it will help us in Illustrator if they have colors on them. Right? One of the problems with the export process is if they're still black and white, a bunch of the lines show up as white in Illustrator, and that gets problematic. Okay? So we've gone ahead and we've changed those colors. Okay? My shape is still selected here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Export Selected. And we're going to choose, instead of a Rhino file, we're going to choose an Adobe Illustrator file, an AI file. Okay? And we're going to click on the Options button. Okay? And so right here, hold on a second. Let me switch into my top view before I do the export. And let me zoom selected. There it is. And let me go to File, Export, Selected. And I'm going to go to Adobe Illustrator again, and I'm going to go to Options. And so here, I want to click this little box for Preserve Model Scale. This is where we can actually specify a scale for this particular drawing. And so if you're doing elevations or sections or plans, which we're going to be doing, scale is important. Right? We need it to show up in the right scale when we go to print our drawing. Here is where we do the scaling before we bring it into Illustrator. If I wanted it to be a 1/4 inch equals a foot, the translation is 48 inches equals 1 inch. Okay? If I wanted it to be an 1/8 inch equals a foot, it would be 96 inches equals a foot. Right? So you can kind of do the math up or down from that. Or 96 inches equals 1 inch here. Okay? So the color scheme, RGB, is fine. And we're going to leave the rest of these unchecked. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Then I'll go ahead and give this a name. And I'll call this, I don't know, front elevation. And this is the spring of 2016. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. It gives me the AI export options one more time just in case I wanted to change anything. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And we'll export it. So now it's time to minimize Rhino for now. And we're going to open up that Illustrator file. So let me go to my flash drive here. And apparently I didn't save it in the correct location. I didn't pay attention to where I saved it. Let's try that one more time. Export selected. It doesn't need to go in the VisOpt settings. It needs to go in my flash drive here. And this is the front elevation. Click Save. Same options. We'll go ahead and say OK. And now that export is done. So I'm going to go ahead and go over and I'm going to open up Adobe Illustrator CS6. And then I'll go to File, and then Open. And I'm going to open up that file that I just saved. There it is. Go ahead and say Open. And if I press Control minus, I can zoom out and I can see there's my drawing, and I have this little white square that represents the paper. Okay? Well, this paper is only 8.5 by 11. Chances are we'd be doing this as a larger drawing eventually anyway. So I'm going to change something that's called the artboard. And I wish that this was easier to understand in the world of Illustrator, but it's just one of those things that's a little awkward. And so over here on the left column, I'm going to look for something that looks like a rectangle. I'll probably draw it here. It looks like a little rectangle, and it has little lines that go beyond it, like this, like that, and like this. And this is kind of shaded in. That's the tool that we're looking for. It's called the Artboard Tool. I'm going to click on it, and it makes the piece of paper look like an object. And from there, I can adjust the size of this to match up with the size of my view. And it kind of snaps to each of these locations like that. Okay? Now that that's done, I can press Control 0, and I can see my whole view exactly as I exported it. Okay? It doesn't look all that impressive here. Right? It looks like a mess of lines. But we're going to go through and we're going to make some modifications. And again, these settings and steps are all written up. Right? As we come down here, there's the artboard. Right? And we're continuing along here. So I'm going to open up the Layers window, which is over here on the right side. And we can see that I have a couple different layers. I have a Make 2D hidden tangents. I have a Make 2D hidden lines. And I have a Make 2D visible lines. Okay, 3 different layers, 2 of which say hidden, 1 says visible. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is I need to select all of the visible lines. And so I'm going to click on the layer, and then over here you see there's like a little circle there. Move your mouse slightly beyond the circle and click. And you'll create a little square that shows up there. Okay? And in my case it shows up as green. If your layer color was different, it might show up as a different color. But the point is that there is a little square that gets selected. Okay? So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to go to my stroke, which is 3 lines, 3 horizontal lines. And from my stroke, I'm going to adjust a few things. The first thing is I want my stroke weight. We'll set it at 0.5 points. Right? And after that's set, I'm going to come over and change the color of my lines. Right now they're green. I want those to be black. So I come over here to something called stroke color. I'll double click, and I'll change those lines to be black. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Okay. Now I'm going to move down to the next layer. Right? The next one is my Make 2D hidden lines. So once again, I'll come over here next to the circle, not on the circle, and I'll click, and I'll get a different set of lines that are selected, and this time they show up as kind of blue. Once those are selected, I'll come up to my stroke menu. And again, all this is written out. And I'm going to change the stroke weight. I want to reference what I said the stroke weight should be here. Hold on. Yeah, it looks like I'm going to have to adjust those. They may need to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to go back and do a weight of 0.5 on these as well. Okay? But I'm also going to check the box here for dashed line because they're hidden. And then I'm going to create a dash of 4 point and a gap of 2 point. So I type that into those two values. Right. Then I'm going to change the color from being in blue to being in kind of a grayish color. Right, kind of a medium gray, something like that. I'll go ahead and say OK. And now all of those are selected. I'll choose my last option, which are my hidden tangents. And let me see what those even are. Ah, those are my couch. Okay, so I will select those. I'll come here. Let's make those 0.25 points, and they should be dashed. And we'll do a 4 and a 2. That's fine. And those are now dashed. And I'll go ahead and click off. Let me press Control 0 for a second. And we can start to see that this is looking better. Oh, I forgot to change the color of those. Let me select those again. And I'll change the color to be much lighter gray. Maybe like that, because the couch isn't all that important. Okay? So this is now, I know it's very dark, or it's very light for you guys to see on the projector, but this is now very much a line drawing. Let's up the visible lines so that they're a little bit thicker. So once again, I'll click on the square. I'll come up, and instead, let's do maybe 1.5 points. Right? This should certainly help you to see it a little bit better, like that. Okay? So now, what I've ended up with is, if I were to zoom in, maybe you guys can see this a little bit more. Right? I end up with a bunch of hidden lines that represent everything that's going on inside of my building. I have some nice dark lines that represent the building itself. Right? But I'd like to push this a little bit more. I'd like to make it look a little bit better than it already looks. Right? So it would help if I had a little bit of shadow to kind of showcase this line drawing. Right? And make the drawing pop just a little bit. Now, I should also point out that there are some things that maybe need some corrections. Like that line probably doesn't need to be there. I can press delete. This line probably doesn't need to be there. Right? So we can correct a few of those things. Maybe these hidden lines that go way down and represent my foundation, maybe those could go away. I could press delete and have those go away. But you certainly get the idea that you could do the cleanups afterward. Okay? So let me keep this where it is. I'm going to go to File, Save before I lose it. Right? And we'll go ahead and save it. And we'll say OK here. And I'm going to go back to Rhino, and I'm going to go away from my top view and back into this front elevation view. And so what I'm looking for at this stage is I want kind of a basic shadows view that corresponds nicely. Oops, sorry, wrong one. That corresponds nicely to kind of a general backdrop. See how on this view here I've got a little bit of shadow that falls, and I've got a little bit of sky that has a little bit of texture to it, etc. That's what I'm looking for. And generally speaking, in practice, it's called something. It's called a clay render, which means there's no materials applied. It's just kind of a basic white render. And so I've tried to make your life a little bit easier, and I did that. If we go to the V-Ray rendering quick setups, which are available under tutorials, V-Ray, it's the first option of the V-Ray setups. And we scroll down a bit, and by the way, these are all working. So I have day scene 1, day scene 2. This is the Malibu overlook for those people that are doing it on the coast. I have a night scene 1, a night scene 2. I have a sunset scene 1, a sunset scene 2, with all the settings that you need to be able to do that render. There's a sunset scene 3. And then we come down here a little bit further down, and here's clay rendering. Okay, so all of the settings that you need are here. Yeah. If you go to tutorials, V-Ray, it's the first option, V-Ray quick rendering setups. Okay? So again, this is me trying to give you stuff so that you can get good, successful renderings. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here. Here's my clay rendering 1. Right? What I need is the VisOp file, which conveniently hasn't been linked. Thank you so much. As soon as I'm done lecturing, I will link that file. Sorry. And we'll do it. I already have it on my flash drive because obviously I created it. But I apologize that it's not there. It's supposed to be there. OK, so let me come up back to my front elevation view. And I'm going to go open up V-Ray options. And I'm going to load, right here under load, the clay render. So let me go to my flash drive. It's under resources, under V-Ray, V-Ray VisOpt, and it's going to be the day clay render settings. So I'll go ahead and open, and we'll give it a second, and that will then load for me. Okay, so I'm going to toggle back and forth and look at the various options. So there isn't going to be an HDRI loaded, right? It looks like I set the reflection and refraction to be white at 8.0 and the GI skylight to be white at 1.0, right? The sun is going to remain on. I'm going to set the shutter speed to 100. The physical camera is also on, right? I have distributed rendering off for right now. And because I loaded this VisOpt, right, all of these settings should have come in. But I like to point out that these are the settings that the VisOpt will load. So now I'll come back here into my V-Ray, and I need to make sure that my view exactly matches. And so your view might be different, your monitor might be set up different, but I need to make sure that this front elevation view, so let me go back to my set view front elevation, and then I'm going to go to V-Ray options and open up the output drawer, and I'm going to unlock the output and say get view aspect, right, to make sure that it matches exactly the same as the view that I have showing on my screen. Once that's done, I'll click lock again, and then I can choose to export a width and a height that is appropriate for my particular drawing. I'm going to go up a little bit. Let's do a height of 1,000, something like that. I do want to confirm that my distributed rendering is off. Good. And all the rest is good. So I'm going to go ahead and click on render. And it may take a little bit of a double check on are the settings quite right to actually show what I'm trying to show. And because this is a clay render with no materials, it renders very, very quickly. And so the size can be large, and the render time is really short. OK, and so like that, it's done. So I now have some background shadow. Now, maybe this is a little bit strong. Maybe my building's a little bit too gray. I can adjust that a bit. by going back to the options, and I'm going to go to global settings, and I've overridden the color with this light gray. I'm going to drop that gray value down a little bit more. We'll go about like that, and we'll render it again. And it should lighten up the background just a little bit because it felt a little too dark. All right, so now it's done. This looks a little bit better on my screen. You'll have to trust me that it looks a little bit better than what you guys are seeing. But I'm going to go ahead and go to Save. And I might save all the image channels, which is going to give me the background. And so if I go here to Alpha, we can see that that's a quick view of what the background is versus what the foreground is, which may be beneficial later on. So I'm going to go ahead and export all the channels, which is the save with lots of disks. And let me put that into today's folder. And let's do, these are front, elevation, JPEGs. And let's call this front, elevation, spring 2016. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. Okay, so now I've saved those views. And now it's time to bring them into the world of Illustrator. I'm going to go to File and then Place. And I'm going to go to those front elevations. How nice. It didn't actually save them. Let's try that one more time. Oh, it saved them all not in my folder. Go figure. So let me go back to Illustrator. And I want the basic front elevation view, which is right here. I'll go ahead and place. And it'll show up here in my drawing, but it's not quite the right size. I'm going to press Control minus to zoom out a little bit, and I need to adjust this size. So I'm going to go click on this icon here, which is an arrow with a little dotted square, which is the Transform tool. And I can hold down Shift and drag this to make it bigger. And it will kind of jump to the right size there, like that. And let me create a new layer and put it at the very bottom. Put it there, and I'll drop it down there. And it should have been quite right. I'm not sure why it's not, but I can use my arrow keys to kind of bump it over a little bit. Because the height is the same, I'm not overly worried about it. Bump this over a little bit more. My arrow keys aren't quite. There we go. So I had to do a little bit of nudging to get it to work just right. Let me press Control 0. It's very subtle, but it adds a little bit of depth and a little bit of shadow to this otherwise flat drawing, which can be useful. I could adjust the transparency of this, right, so that it's stronger or weaker, depending. Since I'm here, I'm going to show you a few more advanced techniques. This is kind of the minimum of what we're shooting for. But since we're here and it's nice to sometimes see the advanced techniques, I'm going to push that a little bit. So I'm going to create another new layer, and I'm going to work to do a little bit of background here. I'm going to go to File and then Place, and I'm going to place in this alpha channel. And I'll go ahead and place. And again, I have to make it big enough. So once again, I'll go to the Free Transform tool, and we'll increase the size here. Like that. I was off on my rectangle. I drew it. Move this over a little bit. Let me turn these other layers off for just a second. Sorry, difficulties in the alignment here. And let me show the align tools here. All right, so there it is. I can turn these others back on. Right, that's essentially where the sky would be as part of this. Okay, but I want to drop in kind of a grunge texture for the sky so that it's just a little crusty. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to File and then Place. Oh, I have to find a grunge texture quickly. Let's quickly look here. Search.creativecommons.org, grunge texture. Something like that looks kind of nice. Sure. Let me download that. Copy it, and I want to put it into today's folder. I'll paste it. Okay, so now I need to do a little bit of work so that that shows up. The first thing is that this particular image is a little bit. It's great because it's the right size and placement and whatever, but it's going to end up being a little bit dark. So we're going to have to do some work on this. So I'm going to come over here to the transparency, and again, this is the advanced stuff. So if you feel uncomfortable, ignore everything that I'm saying at this point, and just get the line drawing and make it look nice with the background clay render, and you'll be fine. Okay. But for right now, we're going to push it a little bit further. I'm going to go ahead and change this into, excuse me, I'm going to click on this little flyout menu. And why won't it let me make an opacity mask? Let me rasterize the layer first. And I'm sure I lost all of you at this point. Oh, come on. I heard rasterize on Photoshop. Yeah, it is like I don't understand why it's not doing what I want it to do. So nice, right? Yep, it does. It happens to me too. Mm-hmm. I try hard not to make it not show up for me, but apparently it likes to show up anyway. That's not what the way it should be here. So I have to go off on my little tangent here because obviously it's not working the way I want it to. Let's see if I can do it this way. Oh, it'll let me do it there. All right, well, I basically failed miserably in doing this. However, that was the end result I was looking for. But it didn't work in any coherent way where I could explain what happened. It's just me fussing with it. So I will. I'll go back and see if I can't make this work a little bit better. Maybe I should have followed my own advice. In the on the website here, there is a tutorial for how to do this, and I probably should have just followed that. It's under tutorials, and then Illustrator, background texture, right here, and it'll walk you through how to do this exact thing. So I probably did something wrong in the step-by-steps, but you guys all seem to be moving on anyway. And I'll revisit this a little bit later on so that you can see this next the next iteration of it. But this is really what we're looking for, is the line drawing that looks like a good sophisticated line drawing, and coupled with that a nice quality backdrop of a little bit of shadows. Obviously I have to adjust this a little bit. There we go. And then, this kind of basic shadows and stuff that give our elevation a little bit of depth, which is what we're after. And then some line weights that really identify our building. And I like the dotted hidden lines because they give us a good sense of what's happening beyond in our building as opposed to just the flat basic elevation. And I think if you can put these together, you can end up with a really good, high-quality output that you can put on a presentation board without having to manually redraw it in, say, AutoCAD or something like that. The nice thing is the same strategy with the Make 2D will work to create an AutoCAD drawing as well. Instead of exporting to AI, you could go straight into AutoCAD if you wanted something to work with in AutoCAD. And probably not as valuable right now in elevation view, but certainly when we get to plans and sections, sometimes that is valuable to get that into AutoCAD and be able to do that kind of a drawing with it. Are there any questions? I know it's a lot to take in. But hopefully it's broken down in a manner that is step-by-step enough. Remember, go back and refer to the various settings. I will go back and make sure the clay rendering is uploaded correctly before you need to use it. But again, here's all those step-by-steps, and make sure you kind of follow through with those, and you'll end up with a good quality output. All right?